the 58th Annual ISNA Convention. Reimagine and rebuild with renewed resolve.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the 2021 ISNA Convention session on strengthening the family institution, focusing on mental health. My name is Sufia Azmat. I am the Executive Director of CISNA, the Council of Islamic Schools in North America. The institution of family is the foundation of our community, but mental health problems are becoming increasingly prevalent in society. These include suicide, bullying, and substance abuse. In fact, suicide is the second leading cause of death for people between 10 and 34 years of age. Mental health problems often lead to problems in families and careers as well. The speakers for this session will address risk factors and ways in which our community may effectively fight the stigma surrounding mental health concerns from a psycho-spiritual perspective and provide preventative measures. ISNA has brought together several knowledgeable speakers to discuss this topic. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Fahad Khan. Dr. Khan is a licensed clinical psychologist with a doctorate in clinical psychology and a master's in biomedical sciences. He's also a Hafiz of the Quran, meaning he has committed the entire Quran to memory, and has studied Islamic studies with various scholars in the Muslim world and the US. He currently serves as the Deputy Director at Khalil Center, the largest provider of Muslim mental health in North America, supervising clinical and research work. Dr. Khan also teaches undergraduate as well as graduate courses in various academic institutions. He is a fellow of the International Association of Islamic Psychology and serves on the editorial board for Journal of Muslim Mental Health, USA, and Journal of Clinical and Professional Psychology, Pakistan. Dr. Khan is actively involved in professional organizations and is currently the co-chair of the Legislative Committee of Illinois Psychological Association.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala wa tu'izzu man tasha' wa tudhillu man tasha' bi yadika al-khayr rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Dr. Fahad Khan, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and the Deputy Director of Khalil Center. Khalil Center is the largest provider of Muslim mental health in North America. Alhamdulillah, serving thousands of Muslims per year through our preventative work, the programming that we do in the community, the Imam's training and the community leaders training that we do, through research and writing, and also intervention work, which relates to individual therapy, marital counseling, as well as family therapy. So I want to talk a little bit about mental health, and it's important for us to understand what mental health means for us as Muslims, and also why should we seek help and how to help others and ourselves here. So first of all, we know the presence of mental health in the United States has increased over time. The prevalence has. 1 in 5 Americans have been known to have a mental illness. Anxiety is very, very common. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for individuals between 10 and 34. And nearly half of the people who suffer from a mental illness also use substances to cope with that illness. Now, when we talk about these statistics, it's important to understand that most people don't seek help, and most people aren't identified unless they reach a certain threshold. So if a person has severe depression and severe anxiety and they're doing fine in their life, this issue doesn't become an issue for them because they're just dealing with it and everything is fine. But when it comes to a certain point and a certain threshold that when their work begins to get affected, when their school is affected, when their social life is affected. That's when they're often taken to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counselor, and they're diagnosed. So these statistics are talking about those individuals. But we know that there are so many people around us, including some of us, that suffer from mental health related issues. And on top of that, as Muslims, we have to be more concerned because underneath the layer of mental health disorders, we also have spiritual illnesses, illnesses that our scholars have identified. And so it's important for us to cater to those illnesses as well. And not only that, the more that we understand ourselves, Imam Ghazali uses this saying oftentimes in his writing, "Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbah," that whoever knows himself knows his Lord. And he attributes it as a hadith, but in any case, the point is that knowing yourself leads to having a stronger connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that is the difference between how religion is used for mental illnesses and how it should be used. What I'm trying to say is that oftentimes we'll hear things like, if you pray more, if you read more Quran, that it will relieve you of your mental illnesses, depression and anxiety. And although there's benefits in prayer and Quran, but we also know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down an illness, and with every illness there is a cure for it, except for all disease. And in another hadith, we are asked to seek that cure. And so going to people that can help you with that cure is essential, but also knowing yourself and being aware and having insight over our deficiencies and our problems that are inside of us is equally important, if not more important, because every Muslim ideally should have that awareness. Imam Ghazali, for example, in Kimya Sa'adat, when he starts out, he says that how can you say you know yourself if you don't know why you get hungry? Why do you need to drink when you become thirsty? Why do you become violent when you have anger problems? So he is trying to make us realize that how important it is to know what's happening inside of us ontologically as well. Another reference would be like the ayah from the Quran. Now, for those of us who are from the Indian subcontinent, we may have heard of the teachings of Allama Iqbal. And Allama Iqbal had this beautiful concept of khudi, which is the idea of training yourself to a point where you become a deputy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was asked where he came up with a concept, and he pointed to an ayah in Surah Hashr where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون. That don't be like those who forgot Allah and Allah made them forget themselves. So there's a correlation between knowing ourselves and knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and knowing our deficiencies. Imam Ghazali quotes another hadith where he says, إذا أراد الله بعبده خيرا بصره بعيوب نفسه, that whenever Allah wishes good for his servant, then he gives him insight into his own deficiencies. So we as Muslims, ideally, when it comes to mental illnesses and mental health problems, we should be the first ones to seek help, because it is something that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has encouraged. But even beyond that, we should have more consideration for spiritual illnesses that have been identified by great giants in the past, like Imam Suhrawardi, Imam Ghazali, Imam Birkawi, and others. And we should even have this yearning and this urge to take care of ourselves spiritually as well. Oftentimes, especially in the American culture, which is a non-Muslim culture, there isn't any attention given to spiritual illnesses. So if someone is suffering from arrogance, kibr, oftentimes nobody goes to a psychologist and seeks treatment for arrogance, unless it becomes a personality disorder like narcissistic personality disorder. We also have now, ideally I would also say that, some level of depression and anxiety is spiritually healthy. Of course, this dunya is meant to be a test. الدنيا سجن المؤمن وجنة الكافر, right? أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, this world is like a prison for the believer. So this world is meant to be a place of test and suffering, but that doesn't mean that we can't go and we can't seek help, especially if that suffering is taking us away from our role in this dunya as a worshipping servant, which can include someone who goes to work, someone who's taking care of his family and his children and has a relationship with his parents and his relatives and neighbors. We should ideally be looking after that and making sure that we can be the best servant towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about some of these mental illnesses, because as we know, and there was a recent study that was just published about how the prevalence of suicide in the Muslim population, when compared to Protestant Americans, it is twice as much that Muslims have in the past tried to commit suicide, for instance. So we know that there's a high incident of these problems. I think it is not, it's time that we have to move past this idea of stigma. We have to move past this notion that we can't talk about mental illnesses. We have to talk to our family, our children about mental illnesses. We have to talk to those that if we notice some signs that these people are isolating, they're withdrawing from others, that they are no longer interested in the same things that they used to be interested in before. These are classic signs of depression. Problems with sleep, where someone is sleeping more or sleeping very little. Problem with eating, if someone is eating more or eating very little as compared to before. These are signs of depression. So it's good to have a conversation with the individual, sit down with them and say, hey, I noticed that you are going through these issues, and I just wanted to ask you, are you feeling okay? Is everything all right? Is there anything I can do to help you? Anything that I can do to provide for you some support? Because we know that some of the factors, among the factors that are considered protective factors for suicidality, religion is one of them. So people with high religiosity, that serves as a protective barrier, but also social connection is one of them. In a very famous study in Harvard, they identified that people who are the ones who are most happy are the ones who are more socially connected. And our deen encourages that social connection, whether it's through the family connections that we have, or it's through the community that we have, or through the masjid, for example. Islam encourages us to go visit the sick, when they're ill. If somebody passes away, we're supposed to have a connection with their family and make sure that we maintain that connection. Our role as parents is not just meant to be this hands-off approach that we don't know what's happening with our children. Rather, we play an active role in the lives of our children, in the lives of our parents. We're asked to serve and take care of our parents, and we don't recognize that all of these aspects contain within themselves factors that can help nourish our mental health and our spiritual health. So we have to really make sure that we reach out to individuals if we notice some of these signs. In COVID times, it was difficult. COVID already increased anxieties that people, some of them who already had anxieties and people who didn't have anxieties, it actually brought in some of the newer anxieties. So we know that Corona times and all the isolation that it forced us to put ourselves into was definitely a factor that increased prevalence of mental illnesses in everyone, including Muslims. But even besides that, our connections have become almost meaningless. So there's research studies that talk about how social media, especially Instagram, for example, can lead to depression. But we have to ask ourselves, why do people go on these social media platforms? Why are our children or our siblings more active on social media, but we don't talk to one another? So it's not about going to your children and saying, hey, social media is bad for you or Instagram is bad for you, you can't use it anymore. It's about developing that connection with them so that they don't find the need to find that connection elsewhere, superficial connection through social media. We can do that. And if we bring that into their lives, then they won't have this need to do that. Now, of course, when it comes to parents and children, there'll always be this disconnect, which has always been there. But I've noticed, and including my work that I've done with children and parents, and even for my own self and what I've observed in my life and others, we don't have this urge to connect with our children. We let others raise our children. And so there's that disconnect that exists. And there comes a certain point where they can't find that support from elsewhere. They're going to be looking up to us for that. And if the connection didn't exist, then we can't find that support. But if we have a strong connection with our children, then if they're suffering from depression, we can have that conversation. We can ask them if they are depressed, if they're upset, if they have anxiety, if there's trauma that they're suffering from. And then we can get the help that we need. That's the second thing I want to mention, is that if we recognize individuals who we think are suffering, who need help, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of the organizations. If someone is suicidal, don't brush it under the rug. Don't try to cover it up. Oftentimes people do that. I've talked to parents who say, no, this is not real suicidality. He's probably not going to kill himself. He's probably not going to do anything. She does this for attention. We hear this all the time, but how do you know that? You don't know that. We have the suicide prevention lifeline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. Have the person call them. Some of the Muslim organizations have done it. Khalil Center has a helpline too, 1-855-5-HELP-KC. And then also Sound Vision in Chicago has a text line. You can text the word Salam, SALAM, to the number 741-741. So there exist resources. We have, mashallah, now Muslim counselors, Muslim psychologists who have spent many years of their life educating themselves and training themselves for just this purpose, to help those who are suffering with mental illnesses. So if we have the resource, please don't hold back. Oftentimes we think, well, what would the world think? What will other people think if they find out that we're going to marital counseling, or if they find out that my son or daughter is seeing a psychologist? These are real. I don't want to say that this is something we should worry about. Of course, people have this sense of haya, and they associate this as a weakness, going to a psychologist. But if we want to change that, and this is the third thing I want to mention, let's change this environment so that people don't have to go see a psychologist when they're ill. Let's make sure that all of us, including myself, I myself go see a psychologist. Alhamdulillah, I don't have illnesses that would hinder my performance at work or my performance as a family member. Alhamdulillah. But I still go see a psychologist once a week, because it's not just about prevention, but it's also about gaining more awareness as to what we do, what I do in my life. Why did I think that way? Why did I go towards that direction? How can I protect myself from doing these things? If all of us, and mashallah, Muslims in America, for the most part, especially Muslims from the Arab or Indian Pakistani origin, mashallah, we all have insurances, and we need to help other people who don't have insurances, who are not very well off, to help them to get the services to them. But if we have insurances, there's absolutely no reason why we should avoid going to see a psychologist, avoid going to see a counselor. If we all did that as a preventative way, as a family, all of us have a counselor, then if the time comes that somebody needs help for being severely ill, for example, we know that the prevalence of severe depression amongst the youth, I think in 2010 or 2012, was like 6%, and then it jumped to like 8% in like 5 years after that. And it's almost like, I think, beyond 10 or 12% now. So we know that if these people are suffering, and if we have this environment of like everyone is seeking help, and there's no shame in seeking help, then if the time comes when they're depressed or suicidal, they will have that support that they need. And that's the environment that we have to work on and creating ourselves. Well, some of the questions I get asked pretty frequently, and I want to make sure I use this time that I have now to answer those questions. One is, how do I get someone else to go see a counselor? Part of going to see a counselor or a psychologist when you work on yourself in therapy is the motivation to change. And unfortunately, the motivation to change has to come from within. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it in the Quran very beautifully. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That Allah does not change the condition of people until they change themselves. So the change has to come from within. Even the psychology literature talks about the same concept, that the only time the person can bring about any difference in their life is if they want to change. If a person recognizes, I have a problem and I need to go seek help, and here's an expert that can help me, then the treatment will work, and then the therapy will be fruitful and helpful. So if we live with some people who don't see that, if they don't recognize that I have a problem, sometimes there's nothing we can do except make dua, except we model our behavior. So then we go see a counselor and say, hey, I'm living with a husband or a wife or a parent or a son who doesn't want to get help, and it's frustrating living with them because they have an anger problem. They have they're narcissistic, or they're using substances, or they're severely depressed, or they have OCD. It's frustrating living with them. So let me get help for myself. That modeling of a behavior can oftentimes result in the other person also wanting to seek help. Modeling positive behaviors is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. I remember reading in the books of Sirah the story of Ali alayhi salam, that when he was young as a child, he saw the Prophet ﷺ praying. Now remember, Ali alayhi salam grew up in the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So he was raised by the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted him to pray, he would have said to him, "Come here, Ali, pray with us," and he would have prayed. But the books of Sirah will say that that as a child he was intrigued and he went and asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "What are you doing?" And the Prophet said, "I'm praying." And then I don't remember the exact wording, but then he said, "I would like to pray," or the Prophet asked him if you want to join, and then he showed him how to pray. That modeling of the beautiful attributes and qualities is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So we need to model that behavior. If we're working on ourselves, we have self-care, self-awareness. If we're educating ourselves into problems that are happening with us, if we're seeing psychologists, then the other people will see that and they're more likely to go and seek help. But if that's not happening, and if you've tried that and still the other person's not changing, unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do. I've often asked other questions, for example, what happens inside of a therapy session? In a therapy session, generally you're sitting down and you're talking to an individual and you're sharing your problems. Sometimes people think that, oh, I can't share my problems with others. I'm not supposed to share them because I'm only supposed to share with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate healer. And we all believe that. Me as a psychologist believe that as well. But Allah also subhanahu wa ta'ala said that فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, that if you don't know, go get the answers from the people of knowledge, from Ahl al-Dhikr. And so these counselors and psychologists who have spent their life training themselves, they are the Ahl al-Dhikr when it comes to mental health. They are the Ahl al-Dhikr when it comes to what's happening inside of us and why this is happening. So we're commanded to go and seek help. And that's what we do in counseling. We go to them and we're trying to gain more awareness. And so the conversation can go in different directions, but ultimately the goal is increase self-awareness, bring a balance about the individual's life so that they're not suffering. And then if you're going for a preventative way, or if you're going for spiritual counseling, then it's going to be more so related to, let's bring more awareness into if we're engaged in some kind of spiritual illnesses. Let's become more aware of our own deficiencies. I'm also asked about use of medication. It's important to understand that not all counselors and psychologists, in fact, psychologists only in few states can prescribe medication. For the most part, counselors and psychologists focus on therapy and counseling. However, there comes a time when some illnesses are so severe that therapy and counseling can't help. If depression reaches a certain threshold, certain point, if someone's obsessive compulsive disorder or their anxiety reaches a certain point that they're not able to respond to therapy, medication is important. And any scholar who's knowledgeable in this matter will tell you that medications for this purpose are not haram. And so people have this idea of like, I don't want to take medications because A, they might be haram, or they're going to have some permanent damage. Almost most of the medications that I'm aware of, especially those that treat depression and anxiety, especially depression, they're very safe medications. Yes, they have side effects. Every substance we take will have some kind of a side effect. If it's not natural, even natural substances will have side effect. But the idea is that in a time when someone is suffering and therapy can't be as effective, we need that individual to go on medications. And these side effects are not permanent. They don't cause permanent brain damage. Most SSRI medications, which are used to treat depression, do not cause permanent damage. Some anxiety medication can be addictive, so you have to keep an eye on yourself. But again, if it comes if you have to choose between not being able to work, not being able to go to school, not being able to get out of your room versus taking some pill, you might have to take that and then go talk to a counselor so the counselor can help you. The difference between the two is that let me give you an example. Let's say that somebody suffered from some kind of a trauma, and that trauma caused symptoms in that individual. Medication can help alleviate those symptoms, but the counselor will help them process their trauma. So these are just some of the common questions I wanted to answer. Anytime if you have any questions regarding mental health, psychological illnesses, or medications, anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. My email address will be on the screen. May Allah allow us to become more aware of ourselves so that not only can we battle the urges from shaitan and our nafs, we can also overcome psychiatric illnesses and we can get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's my pleasure to introduce Rukhsana Chaudhary. Dr. Chaudhary is a mental health expert, clinical psychologist practitioner, and consultant. She earned her doctorate in psychology from the George Washington University, focusing on cross-cultural and ethnic minority psychology in her clinical training. She has completed advanced training fellowships at the Washington and Baltimore Centers for Psychoanalysis, and she is a fellow of the American Muslim Civic Leadership Institute at the Center for Religion and Civic Culture at the University of Southern California. In 2019, she established the first asylum and human rights clinic in the Department of Professional Psychology in her role as an assistant professor of clinical psychology at the George Washington University. Dr. Chaudhary has worked as an expert witness and consultant involving immigration and asylum, sexual assault, the Violence Against Women Act, and international human rights violations.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Dr. Chaudhary, and I'm the Director of Mental Health Programming for the American Muslim Health Professionals. I'd like to talk to you today about several issues that our community has been facing for the last 6 to 8 years. We've really seen that stigma in mental health has become the predominant issue in preventing people from seeking treatment and their overall health-seeking behaviors. And that happens to our community in particular. When we are dealing with stigma, we push down a lot of our experience of mental health struggles for the fear of other people's opinions and views and reactions that they may have about us. When we do that, we amplify the difficulties that people are having in seeking treatment for things like depression, anxiety, and even suicide. People in suicidal crises, and what we have seen in our community, even ignore those thoughts for a long time until it becomes so bad that they may reach out to someone or take a much more difficult choice to harm themselves. And one of the reasons that happens, which is something that is not fully understood, is the issue of stigma. Stigma prevents us from caring for ourselves. And most importantly, something our community has really worked on, but also in particular the American Muslim Health Professionals, is the issue of bullying. When we come to see students who are Muslim being bullied based on racial, ethnic, or religious issues, we know, or identities, we know that that has a mental health impact on their overall experience in school and their overall experience in their community and families. Over time, significant racism, ethnic, and religious discrimination or discriminatory incidents accumulate. And when those accumulate, it does have some impact on identity development. And so when those young people then become adults, they have struggles from that experience they had. And those struggles come in the form of mental health very frequently. So what we know is that there is a need in our community to really work on this issue of stigma. One of the reasons we also say that it's important to work on this issue is because there's a lot of consequences of public stigma. So there's different types of stigma. Self-stigma has to do with individuals belonging to a standardized group and internalizing that prejudice. So when people have an experience of mental health, a mental health struggle, they then stigmatize themselves internally. But what happens when there's a public sense that you are now being grouped with other people that are either seen as weak or not really doing enough of what your faith teaches you, or not being the same as other parts of your faith, as other people in your faith group, then that is a form of public stigma. And we as a community have to come face to face with this fact. Public stigma in our communities prevent people from having the lives that we say and believe they deserve. And when we pull back that curtain of what's behind the mental health struggle, we offer an opportunity to build our ummah and build our community. Because what you don't know about other individuals when they are struggling in their mental health is that there is a chance for connection between all of the people that are having struggles with their mental health, which is really many, many people. We know that in general, everybody knows somebody who has a mental health struggle in the form of depression, anxiety, trauma, or a suicidal crisis at some point in their lives. And what we want to do is bring that out into the light so we can begin to shine some light on those individuals themselves through our community and offer them an opportunity and a pathway to live a life that has something to do with feeling like they can flourish and feeling like they can take part in their faith-based practices effectively, feeling that they can take care for their children effectively, which is all part of our responsibility. So we know that this is a significant issue in our community. One of the ways in which the American Muslim Health Professionals has decided that we would address stigma is by investing significantly in the mental health first aid movement. We've partnered with the National Council on Behavioral Health to work on reducing stigma by training people one by one in virtual trainings at this point. And prior to that, we had in-person training across the country in areas of mental health that people had no language for or no understanding yet. And that has to do with learning about mental health as we learn about our health and learn about our education. And so we can have terms for what it's like when someone is experiencing a panic attack, for example, or someone is experiencing anxiety, or someone is in crisis and does need immediate assistance. What we do is we take people in those groups and we help them learn that kind of language and signs for people in their community who are suffering in those ways, and to help them get to the treatment that they need or receive a referral or be able to get to crisis intervention. When we do that, what we're doing is we're saying you don't have to be a counselor or a licensed therapist. All you need to be is a caring, compassionate Muslim community member or non-Muslim, because we train many other faiths as well in our trainings. And when you do have those skills, those qualities, and a good listening ear, you can essentially help people come out from a very difficult journey into believing in their ability to heal and receive help from others. So sometimes we put people into boxes of, well, you have to have this kind of training and you have to have this kind of education. In this case, what you need is to attend the training, but it doesn't mean you have to be of a certain professional type. And you can receive this training and pass it on to someone else. And you can learn the language, and then someone else learns the language. So mental health first aid has ripple effects. Even if you didn't directly receive the training, you are likely going to learn from someone else that has taken this course and been able to use those words and language and internalize that. And then you can spread that into your own community. We fervently believe in this model because we know that mental health the mental health area of treatment and assessment and research faces such a significant struggle in identifying and tackling its obstacles, that the one way we can approach mental health intervention is by being innovative. And that innovation is seen when we come together in our most basic sense and without requiring so many hoops to jump through in order to just become mental health literate. We know that people are open to this discussion and these terms when we give them the opportunity. And I have seen the American Muslim community take in this training in various formats and various venues across the country and feel as though they are stronger in their ability to take care of themselves and other people around them at the end of it. So this is one example of being innovative as a community for mental health practices and research. When we get down to learning how this impacts communities, we do need to hear directly from people who went through a training or had the experience of receiving help from someone else that allow them to open up. And part of that is by us establishing that space. So perhaps the most important investment for our community will be learning what practices and what trainings we need in mental health first aid and how we can encourage that across our community, how we can begin to utilize other models that are very similar to mental health first aid, even in our masjid or even in our Islamic school. You can think of your own model and you can begin to utilize the very same notion that mental health discussions do not need to be publicly stigmatized, and we don't need to self-stigmatize them either. What we can do is make them a part of our whole being. So I'd like to invite you overall to think about what you can do to begin this discussion in your community, and where the larger community can respond is by providing the format, providing the resources for people to have those discussions. So I'd like to thank you for your time today. I really hope that you do visit our website to think about mental health first aid for your organization or your community, and that's amhp.us/MHFA. Thank you so much.
I would like now to introduce Dr. Shadlee Shebeck. Dr. Shadlee graduated from the University of Michigan in 2008 with a degree in psychology and a minor in biology. He went to medical school at the American University of the Caribbean and received his MD in 2013. He trained in general psychiatry at Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine and Michigan State University. He's board certified in general and adolescent psychiatry as well as addiction medicine. Dr. Shadlee has published several peer-reviewed papers ranging from research and review articles to case reports. He teaches medical students and resident physicians. He has a faculty appointment with Michigan State University College of Human Medicine, and he serves as core faculty for the Garden City Hospital Neurology Department. Dr. Shadlee currently practices psychiatry at his clinic, Core Psych PLLC.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Shady Shebeck. I'm a psychiatrist. I work out of Southeast Michigan. I have 2 locations for my clinic, one in Dearborn and one in Livonia. And I also serve as medical director of the Garden City Hospital Inpatient Psychiatric Unit. I am teaching faculty for Michigan State University as well as several physician associate programs throughout the country. And I serve a large population of Arab American Muslims. Amongst others, of course, a very diverse patient population, but a big part of it is the Arab American Muslims. The issue of mental health within the Arab American Muslim community and the Muslim community at large has been a near and dear issue for me ever since I was an undergrad, where I would do community outreach, and then that kind of propelled me to take a career in psychiatry. And while as a psychiatrist, I've been involved with a Muslim mental health conference, and outreach through various nonprofits. My take on it is a little nuanced, meaning I try to understand the person from a biopsychosocial spiritual perspective, and not only the person but the culture that I'm dealing with, because the person is a product of their culture. I try not to be dismissive of someone's culture. I try not to say that someone's culture is somehow backwards or archaic or doesn't understand mental health and therefore they need to be re-educated to a different culture. No, rather I try to fit in and see where I can fit into the person's cultural construct, and use their culture to their benefit. Instead of tearing down someone's culture or background or saying that, oh my gosh, you guys all have stigma and this and that, I prefer to come in and say, okay, here's the culture I'm dealing with. For example, if I'm dealing with a recent immigrant family, they may come from a culture that's based on honor and shame. What are some of the protective factors of that culture so that I may use it to the benefit of the patient or the client, rather than view them from the cultural perspective of dignity and guilt, which is the predominant culture in the West, save a few countries. Honor and shame, your compass is an external compass that decides your behavior and the way you view things. So it's how do others view you. Dignity and guilt cultures tend to be an internal compass of you do you, I'll do me, and we'll get on with it. Both of these cultural frameworks can be beneficial or harmful, and you cannot also assume that someone is from one construct versus another just based on their ethnicity, because someone could be a second generation American, or first generation, or third generation, or fifth generation, and each one of those things is going to have a slightly different relationship with the dominant culture of dignity and guilt. So that's one thing. So we have to look at who we're dealing with and how we can assist them without making them feel like they're unhelpable, or that they need to, I don't know if that's a word, but without making people feel like they're a lost cause, or that their culture or their view of themselves or the world is completely backward, because that's judgmental, that's judging someone in a negative light and trying to force them into your scope or your view of how they should view the world. Well, that's not a helpful way to deal with somebody. These things tie into suicide in the following. So someone from a dignity and guilt culture versus honor and shame. Someone from an honor and shame culture, their family, if a suicide attempt were to take place, they may want privacy. They may not want that publicized everywhere. They may not want to become the faces of this cause. And we have to be very, very mindful of that. What I've seen sometimes in our communities is there will be a suicide or a case of depression or a hospitalization, and then people will jump on that family, not in a negative way. It's a negative thing, but they don't mean it maybe in a negative way, but they assume that the family needs to disclose all that information. You guys should speak up about how your son or daughter passed away or attempted to pass away so you guys can become the face. Well, not everybody wants to become an activist or a leader or an advocate or whatever. We need to respect where people are coming from and respect their privacy when we're discussing these very important topics. Faith, culture, these things can be protective factors, as I said. So we know that religions where there's the monotheistic religions tend to be protective against suicide. Does that mean they're protective against depression? Well, maybe if you have a good social support, if you really delve into the belief, if you're part of the tradition, if you're actively a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, it could be protective in that to some extent. But just because something is protective against suicide per se doesn't mean the person is not still suffering, and it doesn't mean that suicide cannot happen, and it does not mean that everyone is at the same level of religiosity or involvement in the tradition in Islam. So we have to also be careful when we say something's a protective factor. It's a protective factor in a certain situation, but that doesn't mean the person's not still suffering. Those are some things. Those are, I think, the big things that I see explained in a way that's not as nuanced and not as detailed that I would like to see explained in a better way. When we say that someone committed suicide, or if the information of someone committed suicide comes out, we have to take every precaution to make sure that the family is safe, is okay, if they're processing it well, if they got the help that they need. We cannot assume that every single family that loses someone to suicide or overdose is okay with having that information shared all over the community. And we shouldn't feel like that's a bad, whatever the family decides to do, we should support them in that. When it comes to youth, I think one of the biggest things we can do as Muslims is build confident and resilient youth. That's done through, I think, more interactive mosque involvement. The mosques need to play a bigger role and should play a bigger role. And what I'm saying is not that the mosque should hold a bunch of seminars on mental health and lectures and series and things like that. I don't know if that's even helpful. I haven't seen much data on that. What I think it would be more helpful is if the mosque builds a social support system that's indirect, meaning you have sports at the mosque, you have a community center at the mosque where people actually come to have fun and enjoy each other's company and get to know one another in a way that indirectly addresses mental health needs. And when we look at the human as a biopsychosocial spiritual being, you see how important the social involvement can be, feeling like you belong somewhere, feeling that your identity is intact. That then plays a role in building a more psychologically resilient person. And that in role builds a person who's going to be more in tune with the spirituality aspect and the religious aspect. And, lo and behold, the biopsychosocial means that even those aspects, the spiritual, psychological, and social aspects do influence the biological aspect as well. Happiness and all those things are chemical reactions, but they're also psychological reactions. They're also social. They're also spiritual, ecstasy from spirituality and things like that. So we have to look at mental health from a more thriving perspective, not just as a clinical thing where you just hear seminars and lectures about depression and suicide and this and schizophrenia at the mosque. I don't know if that's the most appropriate way. I think the more appropriate way is going to be building a resilient communities. In our thousands of centers across the country, we have to take that kind of approach where where the youth feel like they belong, that they have an organization that they belong to, that they have a faith and an identity that they belong to, rather than it's dictated only by the adults and the youth just come with their family to the mosque. They should come with their family, but there should be youth programs, and many mosques do this. So many places are doing this. But I think that should be kind of the focus in how to address mental health from an Islamic perspective, is to do it through building that kind of thing: the resilience, the thriving, the social interaction, the cohesion, the sense of identity, the sense of community, and that in turn builds a strong individual. I hope that this message comes to you in peace. I pray that we're all safe, and that your families are safe, and my contact information will be provided for everyone. And with that said, I wish you guys a blessed conference. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's my honor to introduce Imam Muhammad Majid. Imam Majid is the Imam of All Dulles Area Muslim Society, Adams Center, in Sterling, Virginia. He's the chairman of the International Interfaith Peace Corps. He has previously served as president of the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA. Under his direction, the Adams Center has grown to be one of the largest Muslim community organizations in the Washington metropolitan area. He also occupies the chairmanship of the Fairfax County Faith Communities and serves as a chaplain of George Mason University Campus Ministry. Imam Majid is also the vice chairman of Muflihun. He has written for the Washington Post and Huffington Post and been profiled in Time Magazine and the Wall Street Journal. Imam Majid is the recipient of the Washingtonian of the Year 2009 and the Human Rights Award 2005 from Fairfax County.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. My dear brothers and sisters, give me great pleasure to join ISNA convention. Although this year we have it virtual, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have all of us to overcome this pandemic and give healing to those who are sick and those who have passed away this past year. May Allah forgive the sin and widen their grave and shower them with His mercy and forgiveness. The topic that I'm addressing today is the issue of mental health and how we as community deal with it, and how can we address this issue in our family. As you know, there's some stigma in the Muslim community around mental health issues. And sometimes people don't realize that mental health, like any physical illness, a person can have a stomachache or it can have depression. And when people don't see that mental health issues just like physical illness, then they become hesitant to go and seek help. But I would like just to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would test all of us with all kinds of sickness, including mental health. And during Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that there was people in his time who have mental health challenges, mental health issues, and sickness, and the hadith say that there's a woman has mental illness, and she was always stopping Rasulullah and talking to him for a while, and Rasulullah used to talk to her for a while, and sometimes he said, I want to speak to him private. He said, choose any place on the street, corner or something like that, to talk to me, I will talk to you. Now, also been reported that Rasulullah have recommended for people to eat something called talbina, which made of barley, sha'ir. It's because it says it reduces sadness. What I mean by that, that means Rasulullah telling us there's a physical aspect of mental health issues. And therefore, if we have hesitations of seeing medication as part of addressing our mental health issues, then we have misunderstood this hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, I would like to address the issue in many aspects of it. One, the confusion that happened in issue of mental health was the issue of sihr, magic, black magic, and ain, evil eye. And people don't realize that depression can be caused by so many reasons or issues, and including chemical imbalance. And therefore, people attribute everything of regarding mental health issues to sihr and ain, evil eye, and black magic. And that's why we as imams, we have to be very careful not feeding into this misunderstanding of mental health. That's why I said to people that I'm not a mental health professional. Therefore, you need to see a psychologist, professional counselor to address this issue it is not about lack of faith. And there's another issue here that people think if a person is depressed, that means his faith is weak, our faith is weak. That means you need to do more dhikr, then you'll become okay. Dhikr and prayer, of course, help to reduce stress in life. Rasulullah used to say to Bilal, Arihna biha ya Bilal. Call for salah so we can have comfort. No doubt about that. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innu al-qulub. Allah says, with the remembrance of Allah, heart would have comfort and serenity. But you have to differentiate between mental health sickness, mental health challenges, and emotional state, emotional psychological state that required only cognitive therapy, required a person have different views of life. That can be helpful through counseling and dhikr and remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if it's something that deals with a sickness like a physical sickness, require medical intervention, then you have to encourage people to seek medical intervention. And you should not tell them because of lack of faith, lack of iman, your iman is weak, that's why you're depressed. That is really a very dangerous actual approach, because you make people doubting even religion. But one of the things that I want to share with you, you read in the Quran, even prophets had emotional state that had tremendous anxiety and fear. Musa alayhi salam, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him to Fir'aun, they said, oh Allah, we worried about him oppressing us. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them comfort by saying, قَالَ لَا تَخَافَا إِنِّي مَعَكُمَا أَسْمَعُ وَأَرَى. Don't get scared. I'm there listening and hearing you. You have Maryam alayhi salam was in state of tremendous pressure and stress when she said, يَا لَيْتَنِي مِتُّ قَبْلَ هَذَا وَكُنْتُ نَسْيًا مَنْسِيًّا. I wish I was dead and forgotten, because of the pain and because of what she's going to tell people. She was worried about how she will be able to convey and talk to people about what have happened to her. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave another solution. قال إما ترين البشر أحدا فقولي إن نذرت للرحمن صوما. If you to see anyone, say to them, I made a decision. I pledged to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to abstain from responding to people. And then, as you know, Isa alayhi salam defended his mother by Allah saying in the Quran, فأشارت إليه. She pointed to Isa alayhi salam. قالوا كيف نكلم من كان في المهد صبيا. How can we talk to a baby, a baby in the cradle? And then Isa alayhi salam responded to his mother. Or you have Yunus alayhi salam when he was in the stomach of the whale. What did he say to Allah? لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. He has gham, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gham, which is the deep sadness. فَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala released him from this sadness in the state of feeling despair. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the relief. Or Yaqub alayhi salam cried until he became blind, grieving for the loss of his son, Yusuf alayhi salam. You read that in the Quran. You read in the Quran, you read in the Sunnah of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that Rasulullah made the dua of Ta'if when felt like being rejected and being abandoned by people and people throwing a stone at him. He made the dua. اللهم إليك أشكو ضعف قوتي وقلة حيلتي وهواني على الناس. Oh Allah, to you I declare my weaknesses, my vulnerability, being humiliated by people. Oh Allah, to whom you have left me with. People of Mecca are the one who drove me out of my home, and the people of Taif rejecting me. And he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him protections, and he seek refuge by the light of the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For those are the state of emotional state prophets went through, Prophet ﷺ, other prophets, and so forth and so on. Therefore, it's very important for us to, when we are emotionally down, we use the spiritual strength to overcome our, the state of the emotional, sometimes could be very emotionally devastating state, that we need to use our faith to strengthen that state. But we need also to seek professional help. And when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam came out from the Ghar Hira, was scared, worried about what happened, and his wife Khadija radiallahu anha said to him, لعلك خفت, are you scared? He said, yes. And then he said, Zamuluni, Zamuluni, Dathiruni. He asked even for physical comfort. Then Khadija radiallahu anha took Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to Waraq ibn Nawfal, to her cousin, who knew about the issue of revelation because himself was a Christian man and he dealt with scriptures. She took him to the right counselor. For we need to make sure, not keeping, especially our children, taking them to wrong places and thinking that they can become better. Take them to the professional counselors, people who know mental health issues. Now, the other issue that I want to share with you regarding the mental health is the relationship between the Imam and the professionals. The Imam can help in our community by giving the Islamic guidance, how to deal with life, connect people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or it could be also a resident scholar, a female resident scholar, can help in that regard. But it has to be a collaboration to collaborate between the Imam and the professional mental health providers. Why I'm saying this? Because I don't want the Imam to get out of the lane and try to make psychoanalysis of people's behavior, and that may lead to someone even lose their life. Therefore, we have to take it very serious, the issue of depression, suicidal attempts in our families. Now, one of the things that I find it to be helpful to me is that when a person comes to me with mental health issues, I have to take them very serious. I have to take them seriously. And have to give the access to service that beneficial to them. And I would like here to thank our social worker at the Adam Center, Sister Sue, and her team for establishing a very wonderful mental health program by the most subsidizing mental health services. And I want to thank Sister Salma Abu Junaid being one of the pioneers of people that are dealing with these issues in our community and let people overcome the stigma of mental health and counseling. Now, there's something about caretakers I want to talk about. People who are caretakers of people who struggle with mental health issues, themselves, they need counseling. Because it's very difficult sometimes to understand why my loved one is suffering, why my loved one cannot get better, because you can easily see the wound and the bleeding and the temperature, somebody have high temperature. All of those are signs of someone not feeling well. That what people are struggling with, especially caretakers, that I don't see anything wrong with them. It's only in their head. How come they cannot just overcome it? How come they can get better? I want to tell them that, my dear brothers and sisters, may Allah reward you for taking care of members of your family who has suffering from mental health issues, because they really need us. We as a community, our members, our families need us, but also we need support system. We need somebody to lean on. We need somebody to talk to. But if you find yourself that almost you burn out and you need some help, please reach out yourself to our counseling so that you can get the mental health service that you need to continue providing care to your loved one. And the final things I want to mention is people confusing the issue of sabr, being patient, perseverance, with grieving, for example. If somebody lost a loved one, especially in this pandemic, and they have struggling with coping with that loss, they don't need us to lecture them about how patient they should be. They need our support system. We have to be there for them and allow people to grieve, allow people to work through their pain, but we'll be a support system. Many people see someone at the cemetery crying and say, please don't cry, be patient. No, crying does not contradict being patient at all. Rasulullah cried when he lost his wife Khadija. He cried when he lost his son Ibrahim. He cried when he passed by the grave of his mother. He cried when saw Hamza radiallahu anhu body. All of this place where Rasulullah cried. Therefore, please don't mix the two things: being patient and being able to express your grief and your pain. The same thing regarding the issue of relying on Allah in the issue of mental health. Some family says, we leave it to Allah. I'm not going to take my child for counseling. I'm not going to take them from mental health, service providers, because people might think that my label my child, and I don't like my children to be labeled. If you let your child suffer because of what people say, then we have abandoned our responsibility. We should take care of the child and take them to counseling, for therapy, mental health services, regardless what people may say, because our primary responsibility toward our family. Therefore, we need to do that. Take care of our family and loved one. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among those who understand the nature of mental health issues and be able to provide the service needed to our community. I know that many families went through a difficult time this pandemic. Children being sent at home, just looking into the screen the whole day, having class online, and have missed the social aspect of being around their friends and the support systems. And I know also that the stress level went up in family, and unfortunately, that led sometimes to abuse in our family, which is there's no space in Islam for accepting any form of abuse, whether mental, psychological, physical, and verbal, and do not justify abuse by doing victim blaming. You cannot blame the person who's been abused to say, oh, the abuser went through a difficult time because of pandemic. No excuse. Because the person whom this abuser have abused, themselves, they're going to pandemic the same thing. How comes that person justify abusing someone because I'm stressed out and being at home for confined, at home because of quarantine? No, we cannot accept justification of abuse because of being stressed. you have to manage our stress, manage our anger, and we have to be careful, because when we hurt someone and abuse someone, that is a sin that will not be forgiven until justice has been served, until that person, the wrong being corrected. Therefore, it's very important for all of us at this difficult time to be there for each other, to help one another, to ease the difficulty of one another, and to bring the comfort and support needed to our family members who are struggling with mental health issues, and to give support to the caretakers in our communities who've been taking care of loved one who's going through mental health issues. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome to the 58th Annual ISNA Convention. Reimagine and rebuild with renewed resolve.